So let's start with a delusion. A delusion is a false idea, it's a false belief, a false theory about the world. So let's say you believe in a flat earth, okay? Well, that's a false belief, that's a delusion. Usually that's a sign of mental illness. Not always, but usually it's a sign of mental illness. Now, delusions impact countries, not just individuals. Okay, for example, remember Colin Powell appeared in front of the United Nations. He made a PowerPoint presentation about how Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. He showed pictures. The media jumped on it and said, of course, it's irrefutable. New York Times was probably the most guilty of cheerleading the Iraq war. And it turned out that that wasn't true. There were no WMDs. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. And Colin Powell said that was the lowest point in his political career. He was fed the wrong information, he said. Now, that kind of a delusion leads to very costly mistakes. We invaded a country that never invaded us. We killed at least 300,000 people. Some say a million, but at least 300,000 people. It was a war crime, an act of aggression based on false information, based on a delusion. Now, I'm a psychologist. My name is Jerry Kroth. I wrote a book called Duped and about delusions. And then I revised it and called it Implosion, Delusion, Denial, and the Prospect of Collapse. So we're going to talk about this. Is this a delusion? I'm asking you a question. America is a democracy run by majority rule. Is that a delusion or is that a true belief? Okay, we were taught when we were kids to salute the flag, that we lived in the greatest democracy on earth, and that it was majority rule. People would vote. Instead of a dictatorship, people voted and the majority ruled, and that was the outcome. Okay, dictatorship was one rule, democracy was ruled by the people. So the United States was founded in 1776. All right, now follow this. So that's 249 years of democracy, right? That's 249 years of majority rule. That's what we believe, or that's what a lot of us believe. Really? Well, let's start with Susan B. Anthony. She was from New York. She said, I'm going to vote for the president in 1872. And she went to the voting area and cast her ballot. She was arrested. She was tried, indicted, and convicted of voting. Women were not allowed to vote. There was no majority rule if 50% of the population can't vote, right? So we didn't have majority rule until 1920. That's when suffrage was passed. So now we can say, all right, that means we had a democracy with majority rule since 1920. That's 105 years, not 249 years. Okay, good. That's right. Oops, not so fast. What do you mean not so fast? Well, here's the problem. There is still some problem with that idea. Okay? It has to do with the U.S. Senate. Okay, that's the big problem. That's California. It has 39 million people, and it has 2 senators. Okay? That's Wyoming. It has 500,000 people, and it's got 2 senators. That's Rhode Island. It has 1.1 million people, and it has 2 senators. Now, are you getting the point? Watch this carefully. Let's say we're voting on, do you want to legalize abortion? Okay? And the people of California say yes. The people of Wyoming say no. The people of Rhode Island say no. Okay, well, let's take a look at the Senate votes. California has 2 votes in favor. Wyoming has 2 votes against. Rhode Island has 2 votes against. It doesn't pass. It's 4-2 against. Okay? But the popular vote, 36 million Californians wanted it. Half a million people in Wyoming didn't. A million people in Rhode Island didn't. But 34 million people were in favor, but they didn't get what they wanted. Okay? Minority wins, a huge majority loses because of the way the Senate is constructed. When it comes to the Senate, the majority of people do not win. 50% of the Senate is controlled by 16% of the population. It's not evenly distributed. Okay? The least populous states have as much power. Rhode Island has as much power as California and Texas. Sorry, this is not majority rule.
It's always important to remember that you are not watching democracy in action. The Senate is now, always has been, and always will be an anti-democratic institution because the Senate does not represent people. The House of Representatives represents people. That's why it's called the People's House. The U.S. Senate represents land. And because people are not evenly distributed over our land, the 760,000 people of North Dakota get 2 United States senators, and the 39 million people of California get 2 United States senators.
Okay, so that's, you say, well, that's just the Senate. We still have the Congress, and we still have democracy, and we still have majority rule. Hold on, not really true. Nothing can become law without the approval of the Senate. This is the most important paragraph in this entire presentation. Watch carefully. Quote, in the United States legislative process, a bill cannot become law without the approval of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Both chambers must pass the same version of the bill for it to be presented to the President for signature. So if the Senate says no, folks, it's no. End of discussion. Conclusion. The United States is not a democracy where the majority rules. To believe otherwise is a delusion. I'm sorry I'm taking you here, but I'm taking you here for a good reason. Now, it gets worse. Well, you say, wait a minute, yes, but wait. And you're rebutting this. What about the popular vote? The president, the vote for the president, that's majority rule. Isn't that an example of the popular vote, majority rule, president, senator? Yes, in a way, that's true. But remember that Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump and got 2.9 million more votes in 2016 than Trump. But Trump won because he won the Electoral College. The majority did not rule. And when it comes to Al Gore, he won by 500,000 votes over George Bush in the popular vote. But George Bush won the Electoral College and he became the president. Majority did not rule. That has happened 5 times in American history. The majority does not always rule, even in presidential elections. But wait a minute, what about local elections, you say? Well, you've got a point. In local elections, the city council, the mayor, the governor, state representatives, the popular vote does work. The majority does rule in those situations. Take an example. In California, they raised property taxes and it was knocking senior citizens out of their homes. So they passed a law called Proposition 13 that says you cannot raise property taxes more than such and such. Okay, and it has been in effect for 47 years. They keep trying to destroy it, but it's still in effect. So in a way, the majority of people got what they wanted. Okay, now on the other hand, the majority of people in California support the death penalty. Poll after poll after poll. But there are 569 people awaiting execution, and there hasn't been an execution in 19 years in California. So the majority does not win. There's always something that seems to stop the will of the American people. So here's a little exercise. This is based on polls. What would happen if we really did have a democracy run by majority rule? What do you think would happen? Well, first, abortion would be legal in the United States, in every state, with limitations, not after so many months, but it would be legal. LGBTQ books would not be allowed in U.S. elementary schools. Interesting. It would be allowed in high schools, but not in elementary schools. That's how the American people feel. The U.S. would not have troops in Syria or Iraq. We've got troops in Iraq. We're occupying a third of Syria. American people do not approve. Taxes on the wealthy would increase immediately. CEO salaries would decrease immediately. Medicare would be available to all people, a public option. Nobody supports it in the Democratic or Republican Party, but the American people, that's what they want. None of these things are happening in our society. All homeless people would be arrested if they refused to go to a shelter. I was surprised by that, but that's how the American people feel. And the death penalty would apply to all states. So that's what would happen if we really had a democracy. Okay, so conclusion. The majority does not rule in the United States. There is some majority rule at a local level, but nothing gets passed without the approval of the Senate. All right, now I want to show you a picture of the Senate. You think, well, the Senate, it's a Democratic body. It's a cross-section of America? I'm sorry, it is not. The United States is made up of 50% women, but in the Senate, only 26% are women. So it's underrepresented. Women are underrepresented in the Senate by a factor of 2. 14% of the American population is black, but only 3% of the Senate is black. They're underrepresented by a factor of 4. 19% of the American people are Hispanic. Only 7% of the Senate is Hispanic. So they are underrepresented by a factor of 2.5. 2.4% of the American people are Jewish, but 9% of the Senate is Jewish. They're overrepresented by more than 3% times. 7% of the American population are made up of millionaires, but 66% of the Senate is made up of millionaires. They are overrepresented by a factor of 9. And 2% of the American people have over $2 million, but 90% of the Senate has over $2 million. They are overrepresented by 45 times. The Senate is not representative of the United States population, okay, at all. Now, let's talk about insider trading in the government. This is Nancy Pelosi, okay? She has been a member of Congress for many, many, many years, decades. So I totaled up her maximum total salary that she got as a congresswoman over all these years, and she earned $6.4 million as a congresswoman over the entirety of her career, right? However, her net worth is $430 million, okay? She made 67 times more than her actual salary while she was in Congress. That's Nancy Pelosi's stock portfolio compared to the market as a whole. She does better than anyone, better than the best experts, better than Warren Buffett, because she has insider trading and she just uses it and there's no law against it. Martha Stewart went to jail for insider trading. Nancy Pelosi went to the Oscars for insider trading. It's okay if you're a congressman or a senator. You can get rich fast. So remember, at the national level, no bill can become law without the approval of the U.S. Senate. And remember that 66% of the Senate is made up of millionaires. So that means no bill can be passed without the approval of the 66 millionaires in the Senate. That's called government by the wealthy. So let's talk about net worth. Here's a senator in Florida who's worth $500 million. Another senator who's worth $250 million. Another senator who's worth $178 million. And this senator is worth 65 million. And this senator 55 million. And that senator 55 million. And that senator 54 million. And that senator 54 million. And that senator 25 million, 31 million, 52. Let's throw in Nancy Pelosi too. She's not a senator. But those 11 people, remember, 100 members of Congress and the Senate are each worth more than $10 million. Okay? The American people, only 1.6% of our population has $10 million. Okay, so it is really, somebody made a composite photograph of all the members of the Senate and all the members of Congress and squeezed it into one photograph. One very rich white male. Okay. Government by wealthy white males. That's closer to the truth. So we are talking about government by the wealthy. And that is the definition of plutocracy. Plutocracy, a country or society governed by the wealthy. So the truth is this. You do not live in a democracy governed by majority rule. You live in a plutocracy governed by the wealthy. It's not an original observation by me by any means. Two professors in Princeton did a study of voting patterns and said, America is not a democracy. Another professor says, America is not a democracy. Noam Chomsky says, America is not a democracy. The U.S. is an oligarchy, says another. Ramsey Clark, the former Attorney General of the United States, said, we are not a democracy. It's a terrible misunderstanding and a slander of the idea of democracy to call us that. In reality, we are a plutocracy governed by the wealthy. Lots of books on that subject. So giving up a delusion is difficult, all right? When delusions are destroyed, a belief is confronted and you realize it's false. That's painful. This is a guy who said, I told kids that Santa isn't real. Look at that poor little girl. She had her bubble burst. Now this woman is a mother. She has 3 wonderful children. She has a husband who loves her. She loves him. What percentage of this woman's identity belongs to being a mother and a wife? Probably a large percent. Okay, that's her belief system. Then when she sees her husband cheating on her, it's devastating. It ends. She realizes her image of herself has been a delusion. She's been living in fantasy land. I had a client once who was happily married for 13 years, and then she discovered her husband had been going to prostitutes since the very first year of their marriage. It took her years to recover from that. So there are a lot of young men who thought they would volunteer, and they are now disabled. They're 30 years old, and they'll never walk again. Okay, and they're in wheelchair bound, and they thought that they were going to volunteer for a tour of duty to fight Saddam Hussein, who had something to do with bin Laden and 9/11, and Saddam Hussein, the dictator, who had weapons of mass destruction, and they offered their lives in service of their country. And then they learned that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11, and they learned there were no weapons of mass destruction. And that burst their bubble too. And that delusion is painful when it's broken. Disappointment, bitterness, anger. It's not easy to give up a delusion. Most of us always believed we lived in the greatest democracy on earth. It's hard to process that that is not true.
Our democracy is what is at stake.
Protecting our democracy.
And the greatest democracy on earth.
Our democracy. Our democracy. Our democracy.
We are the heirs to the greatest democracy in the history of the world.
Hard to digest that that's all propaganda, that that's just not true. Okay? So that's the bad news. And it is sad. Okay? But it is better to know the truth than to persist in a delusion. Okay? That woman who was married for 13 years looks back fondly on her happy marriage, but would never go back to it now that she knows what she knows. So the delusion, once again, is the government of the people, by the people, and for the people is not true. The truth is government by the rich, of the rich, and for the rich. And that's what is the unfortunate truth. Getting rid of a delusion makes us wiser than getting hold of a truth, says Ludwig Born. It's a harder job. Carl Sagan said, "It is far better to grasp the universe as it really is than to persist in delusion, however satisfying and reassuring." So, sorry for the bad news, but it's important. My book, Implosion, is available on Amazon. You can contact me there. Many thanks for watching.